Alright, we're going to show you how to install the throttle linkage kits for the 79cc Predator. We have two kits, the 12320 and the 12330. The only difference between the two is one of the L brackets is different in them. And the 12320 is what we recommend if you're not going to use the fuel tank on top of the engine. It gives a little more room for the throttle linkage kit. And if you do want to use a stock fuel tank on top of there, then use the 12330 kit. This one will keep the kit underneath the tank. So the first order of business is to drill a hole for the throttle rod. And as you can see, the governor has been removed from this engine. There's no governor in this engine. You can use the kits with the governor, but in this video we're going to show you how to install it once the governor has been removed. So the first thing we're going to do is drill a hole here in the throttle lever, and we're going to use a 5/64 bit to do that. Alright, once you have the hole drilled in the throttle lever, you're going to have to loosen up this nut right here. So, because you can't move the throttle lever. So, you take a number 10 wrench and you loosen that until it moves freely. You don't want it too loose because you don't want any up and down slop in the lever, but you want to make sure it moves freely so that when you hook up your return spring, the throttle returns. So that's pretty good right there. A little bit of up and down slop in there, but for the most part that's pretty good. So what we'll do next is we'll take our throttle rod that comes in the kit, and it has the Z shape on one side, L shape on the other side. The Z shape goes into the carburetor. So you have two holes in the carburetor's lever here. This is where the stock rod went and the stock governor spring. So we're going to use this governor spring hole, and we're going to put our throttle rod into that hole like that. And then the L-shaped part will go in this hole that we just drilled like this. And then we're going to take the bottom portion of that and we're going to bend it. We're going to bend it back this way so it doesn't pop out. So with some needle nose pliers, we just reach down. We just bend that back a little bit. So that's not going anywhere. We have that in place. We have the Z shape in place, and now we have a moving throttle. And so here you can see the throttle stop. It's preventing wide open throttle. If you look right here, if you look at this tab right here, this is currently at idle up against the idle screw. But for full throttle, the tab needs to come all the way around, and it stops right here on the body of the carburetor. So you can see we don't have that right now. So what we'll do is we'll back this screw out until we can get full throttle. Getting closer. Back that out a little more. There we go. Now you can see we're getting full throttle, and we're stopping on that throttle stop right there. So you could take this throttle stop completely out, and it just kind of depends on the application whether or not that's a good idea. If this is in a go-kart and this throttle is connected to a foot pedal, if you're really forcing the foot pedal down, and you don't have the stop, you're just going to put all the pressure into this rod and bend this rod, and then when it comes back to idle position, it'll be messed up. So we like to leave the stop in there. So the next order of business is to install the return spring that goes here. The return spring is on an L bracket. This is our return spring. And then what we'll do is we'll take an M6 bolt and we'll thread it in over here. The throttle lever has a hole in it already right here. You just put your return spring in that hole. So once you have your return spring installed, you can test it, make sure it pulls your throttle back. You can install an additional return spring. You can add another spring on here, maybe a stiffer spring or similar spring, so that you have a backup spring. But one spring comes in the kit. And now if you don't get a full return like we're getting right here, you can adjust this nut right here, because maybe you have a little bit too much tension on the arm, and that might prevent it from coming back to idle. But in this situation here, you can see it's coming back to idle, so we're good there. All right, the next thing is the retainer. Your throttle cable comes in here, the cable comes out this side, and the cable hooks up onto the lever. And this is what's different between the two kits. Part number 12330 has a long bracket for the conduit retainer, and the long bracket mounts down here, which keeps it underneath the fuel tank. The fuel tank sits up here. So if you're going to use a fuel tank, you want part number 12330, which includes this bracket. This is from 12320, and this is what you would use if you're not going to use a stock fuel tank. Like in a lot of motorized bicycles, we don't use a stock fuel tank. So what you'll do is you start by removing the conduit retainer from the L bracket. The L bracket will get mounted here, but first we're going to flatten it and straighten it out. All right, with our L bracket straightened out, flattened out, we could take one of the fuel tank bolts, the fuel tank mounted here, and we can mount our L bracket there. And then the conduit retainer is going to go into this bracket. However, the cable is going to go into this hole right here. So we want the conduit retainer pointed toward that hole. So we'll just take some big pliers here, and we will angle our bracket in that direction, like that. Once we have that angled down, we could insert the conduit retainer. So once you have the conduit retainer secured, then you could insert the throttle cable. So here's our throttle cable. We'll put the cable through the conduit retainer, and then we'll put the outer housing inside our retainer, and then we'll stick the cable through this hole that's already in the throttle lever. Right there. And then the last part of the throttle linkage kit is a wire stop. So we'll take our wire stop, and now for this part, you're obviously going to have to adjust how much of this cable is in or out and where you clamp it, depending on what you have going on the other side. If you have a mini bike or motorized bicycle, you're going to have the cable in a twist throttle assembly. So you're going to have to maybe pull, like take the twist throttle to idle, and then pull all the slack out, and then tighten this down. Now just for this installation video, we don't have it hooked up to anything on the other side. But now you can see, like, if you did have this hooked up to your twist throttle assembly, or if you had it connected to a throttle rod, to a throttle pedal on a go-kart, you can see now that you have a working throttle.